Hey guys, Crazy G-Man here. In this video, I'm going to go over some quick tips and tricks to help you get the most out of the MiG-21 Bis in multiplayer. These tips have helped me a lot when flying myself over the years in multiplayer, and I hope you guys find them helpful. So a couple things you want to do when starting up your MiG-21 that won't be started up as if you do an auto start. So if you do the auto start sequences, these things will not be turned on. So I'm going to go over a couple things that you want to have turned on before you fly your MiG-21 into combat in multiplayer. So the first thing is your RSBN navigation system. This will give you a vector and a distance to the nearest airfield along with a Morse code that you'll be able to hear over your radio. It's affected by line of sight, so you need to make sure that you are essentially not having ground clutter blocked by it. Here I'm also opening up my countermeasure cover and unlocking my landing gear cover. So here I'm pulling up the knee board, and you can see I put in 13 for the RSBN. That's 13 Kutasi for airfield. And I flipped the switch from ARC to RSBN. That's the up position right there. So then I also flipped the switch to get rid of the Morse code. And right now I want to essentially align my compass. So I press the compass realign switch, which basically, once it's done moving, it's done. Then I turn on my pitted heat, then I turn on my ground clutter filter, and I turn on, most importantly, my IFF transponder. Without the IFF transponder turned on, you will not be able to IFF, and enemies and friendlies on your radar will appear the same. So then get all my weapons ready, and we're pretty much ready to go here. Something a lot of people don't know when they fly the MiG-21 Bis for the first time is the second reheat feature. This is a separate switch that you need to turn on and activates as soon as you go into Afterburner with the throttle. What it does, it gives vastly improved thrust at altitudes under 4,000 meters. Above 4,000 meters, the system automatically turns off, and the system is limited for use for about 3 minutes with a 30-minute rest in between uses. It was used as a stopgap measure, and it's specifically there for dogfighting at low altitudes. Another important feature of the MiG-21 is that it has no automatic maneuvering flaps that some other aircraft like the F-5 have, that depending on your setting will automatically deploy as you get slow. However, this doesn't mean that the MiG-21 can't deploy flaps to get additional lift when they get slow. This only works in the takeoff setting. If you go into the landing setting, the basically blown flaps feature prevents afterburner use. So if you go into your landing flaps, you'll notice that you'll lose all your power from your engine. So I recommend only doing the takeoff flaps. One other important note is you don't have to worry about overspeeding the flaps. The flaps just automatically get pushed in as wind resistance increases, so you don't need to worry about accidentally jamming them. But they do cause drag, so it's always recommended to essentially bring them up when you're done using them. Using the emergency afterburner and flaps is really only useful if you're going to get into a slow speed dogfight, which frequently does happen in the Cold War server settings. So I'm going to do an example and demonstration here where I fight 2 Vigans. Now my first Vigan, I'm able to do an ideal intercept without him noticing me, kill him with a missile, and I try to essentially break off and get to safety as quick as I can, but I hear a call out for another enemy that's right next to me, so I don't see him visually at first. He's flying right over, I see with the tracers, and so now he's engaging me, and I flip it into emergency burner, and since we're already starting to get slow and make tight circles, I'm deploying my takeoff flaps here to essentially give me extra AOA and to prevent me from tip stalling. So definitely, like I said, we are going to do a bunch of turns here now. This is not necessarily the best thing. You will get extremely slow by doing this, but you can make your turns very, 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 very tight. And against, say, an opponent like the Vigan, which has very, very good power to weight ratio and a very strong engine, it is extremely draggy. And since I'm able to keep this fight below 4,000 meters, I can stay in my emergency afterburner setting for basically as long as I need to. And right now we're just doing a vertical fight, and he's trying to get his nose around to make his missiles as effective as possible. But he needs a fair bit of distance, so I'm just trying to keep as close to him as possible and get this fight as slow as possible. Because the slower I can make it, the better my MiG is going to do. The MiG is definitely the best low-speed fighter in the Cold War server, barring maybe the A-10, but there's ways to beat that, which I'll show later on. So again, it looks like he is getting the best of me, but he is essentially now become a rock. He's done everything he can to get as much AoE in me as possible, and he's basically run out of engine power. So he has to essentially try to take it horizontal to get back a little bit of the speed, but I keep pressuring him and threatening him with my nose. And so he tries to basically get, and I have to be careful too because I am getting very slow and I get very close to the ground there. But right now he's essentially run out of energy and he crashes into the ground. So that is one thing where the emergency burner and your takeoff flaps can help you win a low-speed dogfight. Again, if you notice right now, I am extremely slow. If any of his teammates were nearby, I would be a simple, easy target to shoot down. It's going to take me a while to gain back a bunch of speed. Another example where I'm going to be fighting an A-10. So I noticed this A-10 basically fire a missile at me. And we're both low, and yeah, there he shoots the missile, and I can visually pick him up. So we're already slow on the deck, and he takes a pot shot at me, so I take it vertical. You never want to do a horizontal turn with the A-10. Its low speed turning ability is just the best, but you can make up for that by utilizing the vertical. Now I use my takeoff flaps to essentially be able to pull this AOA so I don't tip stall, and then want to cut engine power because I do not want, I fire a missile, but he deploys players right at the right time, defeats the missile. Now, rather than trying to go and pull lead there for a shot, which is basically going to result in me pancaking the ground, I instead again take it back up vertical. The A-10 unfortunately is very underpowered. It can do these tight turns, but it really has no engine power to get back up to speed. So you can basically, as long as you keep it turning, you can wear it out, where you can get a lineup for a good shot. So here again, I'm going to just do kind of a high yo-yo maneuver, wait till he basically has to straighten out a little bit or risk crashing, which is right now. So again, still have takeoff flaps and also emergency burner, which I'm going to use when I need it, but in my dives, I'm not going to use it so I don't go too fast, so I can kind of stay with this A-10, get a small tag with him there, and he's just trying desperately to not get shot, but we're both slow, and I'm just right behind him, and it's just easy there, and then I could use my emergency burner, just give myself the thrust I need to get out of that situation, and that's the A-10 dealt with. So when I fly on a Cold War server, usually I'll take off from my base, climb to altitude to conserve fuel and to maximize my speed, and then once I get within about 30 or 40 kilometers of either an enemy or a target, I will drop down to the deck to essentially hide as best as I can from the radar in the ground clutter. Usually at that point I'll have used up all of my external fuel tank, which generally happens when the fuel gauge just goes to about 2,900 liters. Just to be aware, that fuel gauge only measures fuel flow. It does not actually measure how much physical fuel is in your tanks. So if you just in your center tank before that gets to 29,000 liters, you won't have that fuel that's shown on the gauge. The remaining, you might be 200 liters or 300 liters less. And this frequently happened to me where I thought that I had more fuel, and I didn't realize I had to adjust my fuel gauge, which you can adjust with a little knob there, and I essentially ran out of fuel. So you need to pay attention to the lights that basically tell you how much fuel are left in the various different tanks that's right beside that fuel gauge. So one important thing to note whenever you're flying on Cold War is to monitor that fuel situation. Also realize that whenever you're flying the MiG-21, your fuel weight affects your performance. Usually I prefer to actually get in a fight somewhere around 2,500 to 2,600 liters, which will usually give me enough fuel to do several dogfights with, but will keep me light enough in case I need to fight various different opponents. So with this, I'm going to show you how I use the radar. So I IFF, which shows the 2 dashes for a friendly and a single dash for an enemy. Remember, you need to have your transponder turned on for this to work. And then I lock up the target, and I basically place it right in the center where the little plus sign is. And you can see the distance. I use this to basically help me visually pick up the target. Still can't quite pick them up visually, so again I go back and reference the radar, and now I finally pick up the target. It's both friendly and enemy. So now that I know that it's a enemy that I'm looking at, I can turn off my radar. And I'm just trying to line up a position to get an attack. I'm going to overshoot here, so I'm going to essentially try to climb back up and reposition myself. He does see me and take some pot shots, so I didn't really do this intercept very well. And of course I try to pull too much lead too quickly and tip stall. This is where using your takeoff flaps can definitely help you prevent from doing something like that, because a lot of times when you do that tip stall, you will lose essentially your visual reference on where the enemy is, which is very key when fighting in a dogfight. So again, I turn on my radar again, and I just periodically turn it on and off. If you use it in standby mode, and like I said, I do, and here I can see that there's an enemy target off to my right. Like I said, you can basically keep it on standby, turn it on periodically, and you don't need to worry about running out of coolant for your radar. You'll run out of fuel way before you run out of coolant. So again, quickly spotted that target on my radar, visually ID'd him just to be sure, fired a missile at him, and was a little bit optimistic that the R60s, while they are the best missile that the MiG-21 Bis can take, especially the Ms that have some front aspect, they do have very limited range, but they make up for that with a good maneuverability and the ability to essentially hit targets from very short distances. And here again, we'll go into another example of the radar. Really, the radar and the IFF feature are what make the MiG-21 so effective on the Cold War servers. None of the other planes on the blue sides have the ability right now to IFF, which means that at a distance of 30 to 20 kilometers, you can see what enemies are nearby, and then at 20 kilometers lock them up. So here I've already, again, locked up a target. Now usually I just lock up targets so I can basically visually acquire them, and as soon as I visually acquire them, I'll turn off my radar so I can do a silent intercept. You can see the the vertical bars on the horizontal line. That's basically telling your distance. You can see here on the gauge as I'm slowly closing, I turn off my radar right there so I can do this intercept silently. And again, as I mentioned before, while the R60s have very limited range, they are able to engage and track from very short distances. So here I do a very late missile shot, but it still manages to connect. This is something that the AIM-9s can't do, that none of the R13s or R3Ss can do, or R3Rs. The one disadvantage that the R60 has versus the AIM-9s is the AIM-9s have much longer ranges than the R60s. The R60s just run out of steam. In some cases, the R13s have slightly longer staying power. They don't get quite as slow as an R60, so there are some rare occasions where an R13 will reach out and touch a target that an R60 won't. But the R60s accelerate much faster, and while they have, a limited warhead, you want to make sure when using them to potentially, if you're going to fire at something on an A10, you might want to fire 2 just to make sure that that target's going to go down. One thing, whenever I take missiles, is I only ever take the single set missiles. I don't take the double racks. I have experimented with the double racks a lot, and I just don't find they are worthwhile to take. I find they affect your maneuverability too much if you're going to dogfight. And I also find when you select your missiles, the sequence is 3, 1, 2, 4. If you go from the outer leftmost of the aircraft to the outer rightmost of the aircraft. But if you say select your double rack, which say is on station 1, and you don't change your selector mid-fight, it will fire both missiles off of that rack before it goes to the other wing, which will essentially give you an asymmetric load and drastically affect your performance. Also, for any of the heavier missiles like the R3S, the R3R, and the R13 missile, firing only one missile will also give you an asymmetric load. Now, there's no roll trim in the MiG to compensate for this, and if you're doing a very, stressful dogfight, you will notice the difference in weight. So something that I sometimes do is I will flip the cover for my jettison inner pylons and or outer pylons, and I'll have those essentially tied to my HOTAS so that if I need to, I'll be able to drop load in order to essentially improve my performance in a dogfight. So one thing to not discount when flying the MiG-21 is the use of the 23mm cannon. This cannon can actually be quite effective. I like using it actually in head-on attacks quite a bit. Usually it does require a fair amount of deflection to use. I do not use the ASP gun sight, the gyro portion. I honestly just use the fixed sight, and honestly I don't even use the caged part of the with all the essentially the graphs on the site. I just like to use the pipper because I like to essentially have as much visual free space as possible, not have it cluttered up. So yeah, fortunately flying IL-2, I've learned to fire fairly accurately using a fixed pipper, so I just prefer to use the fixed pipper on the MiG-21 and then just determine lead myself manually, and it's actually fairly effective in a lot of cases. So the guns, are quite good for air-to-air. You can use them in air-ground as well, but of course you're going to be getting very close to anything that you're shooting, so as long as they don't shoot back, it's fine, but if anything can shoot back with a decent amount of high-caliber rounds, it's not something you want to be doing with the MiG-21. But that being said, usually you'll surprise. I mean, in terms of like the other aircraft, like the F-5 and the MiG-19, the gun isn't as good, but it is definitely worth considering and having in your wheelhouse and not discounting. One thing you do need to remember is to make sure to manually load your gun. The worst thing ever is to forget to load your gun and then to engage in a dogfight and not have it available when you need it. Here I'm going to quickly pull a nice lead shot on this F5, and that's 2 gun kills, one right after the other. One thing to remember when flying the MiG-21, your situational awareness is not very good. Your radar, while definitely capable in a Cold War setting, is only a look-up radar. It doesn't have any look-down or shoot-down capabilities, and it has a very limited range when compared to 4th-gen aircraft. And it never was designed to be that way. It was designed to essentially be guided to targets by ground radar stations, and then use its radar in the final kind of portion of the flight to intercept the target. So whenever you're flying the Cold War server, you need to make sure that you are either using ground radar stations with bogey dope callouts to essentially vector you to targets, and then you're going to then want to use your radar to essentially acquire these targets, and then you want to then visually essentially pick them out, ideally after you IFF them, and then again visually IFF them before you engage. So using, the best way to do this is of course always to have a human GCI. They can give you updates very, very quickly, and they can prioritize who needs the help the most. Now, the Overwatch bot in Enigma's Cold War server does a decent job of doing that, but if there are a lot of opponents near fighters, it can get very cluttered, and I know I myself am guilty of definitely spamming the Overlord bot a fair bit, and this is something you don't want to do because it can potentially hamper your teammates. So just remember that you want to be constantly aware of your position on the map and using that GCI callouts to try to build as much situational awareness that you can, because you can only really gain so much with your aircraft with it lacking any sort of data link, and with it essentially having very limited radar range and no ability to look down. This is also the reason why on the Cold War server you'll notice a tendency for aircraft to stay very close to the deck, and this is just so they can remain undetected for as long as possible, or to disappear both visually in the background of the trees and also from any radar stations. So it's very important to be aware of this. If you're going to be flying high, make sure that you're in a position or you have teammates to support you. Otherwise, you can have what happens to this A-10, which unfortunately decides to fly very, very, very high and turn on its ECM jammer, which basically tells me exactly where it is, and I'm able to lock it up as soon as I get close enough to burn through the jammer. And now, even though I can't visually see him, I've already picked him up. I got the AWACS call for his general position, which allowed me to turn on my radar and basically find him. And now all I need to do is basically, intercept, listen out for any calls that are going to be for aircraft that might be trying to intercept me getting to this A-10. Now, again, I turn off my radar once I visually pick up the target, because I don't want to give him any warning. I actually want him to think that maybe I've broken off lock or something else has occupied me and he can ignore me now. And then I'll basically set myself up. Now, right now I just have regular R60s, no R60M, so I have no front aspect shot. Even though with the R60Ms I do prefer to get a rear shot if I can. I find they are a lot more successful. You can definitely get front aspect shots with the R60Ms, and they do work, but the range at which you can lock up aircraft is very reduced, so you want to keep that in mind. So if you can, always try to get a rear shot if you can with the R60s. And here we go, and boom. Another common occurrence that happens in the MiG-21 is an engine flameout when you go above essentially 1,300 indicated airspeed. That's the airspeed that's on the left upper part there, and you can see right now I'm at 1,300, 500, and doing this for excessive periods of time will cause an engine flameout. So unfortunately, this means that if you're trying to go after a VIGIN on the deck, you're not going to be able to catch it without losing engine speed. Now you can of course do an emergency restart. Your first emergency restart will generally happen as long as you press the emergency restart switch, which is the black switch on the side, which I'll highlight here in a second. And you notice here you can pretty much initially you do it right away. You just bring your throttle down to idle, and then you press the E switch, which I've just circled right there, and you'll hear your engine start to spool up again. So you basically get one freebie. I believe it uses a canister of gas to actually force air to basically spin up the turbine, the compressor. Now, the other thing that can cause an engine flameout is long periods of negative and or 0G. Negative G, there's enough usually fuel in the negative G fuel tank to let you do it for several seconds. At regular speed, you can do this for quite a number of seconds. With Afterburner, it's significantly less, and with emergency burner, it's even more significantly less. But a lot of times, what you'll find is in a dogfight, as you get slow and you aren't pulling any G and your G's are hovering, you can see right now I'm just hovering around 0G, you're essentially going to starve your engine of fuel, and as you see right here, I again have a flameout. So now that I've used my essentially freebie engine start, what I have to do is I have to again pull my throttle all the way down to idle again, and basically I want to get low and I want to get above, I believe it's 600 kph. 600 kph is what I usually do, and I wait for my engine RPM to settle, and then I press, once I see it start to rise a little bit, I then press the E to essentially do an engine start. Now again, this will be effective depending on how much fuel you have, and again, depending on your altitude and your speed. So here, I managed to get it restarted again, so it's slowly, as it slowly starts to rise, I slowly input throttle into the engine. And with that, I'm essentially able to do another restart. And again, the final way that you can essentially cause an engine flameout is by doing inverted flight for a significant period of time. So just here, I'll slowly demonstrate it. I'll turn and try to maintain an inverted flight, which again puts me basically at a negative G for prolonged periods of time, as you can see by my G gauge. And again, it causes my engine to flame out. And again, what I do is I can pull the throttle all the way back to idle, wait till my engine RPMs basically wind all the way down, and As soon as they settle, I'll press the black engine restart switch, and again, I'm actually make it work. Now, in practice, in multiplayer, I find usually if I'm doing an engine stall, I can use the freebie, the first one, which I believe uses the tank of gas, compressed air to basically restart the engine, but afterwards, most of the time, I'll either be too low in fuel or it'd be too slow of the speed or too, uh, to essentially restart the engine. So on one last final note, I find flying defensively in the MiG-21 is actually fairly, I won't say easy, but it has some certain advantages. Like I said, the MiG-21 is able to get slow and cause an enemy to overshoot, and then be able to essentially pick up speed and engine power and remain aloft while other planes struggle. So here you can see I'm engaged basically as a surprise. I am doing some, I am stalling a little bit, pulling a lot of AOA. Basically, I'm going to force this M5 to overshoot just by doing a scissors and trying to make sure visually he fires a missile at way too close a range, and now he's already overshot. And of course, since we're on my side, my Shulka gives me a hand there and damages him. And now he's trying to fly away, but I basically tucked in my flaps and went towards the afterburner, fired a shot, and I think he was trying to get below those trees, but it didn't quite work, and managed to win that fight there. So I hope you guys like these tips that have helped me. I hope you guys find it useful, and I hope you guys have tons of fun flying MiG-21. You guys have a great day.